All right, let's dive into something pretty wild. On one hand, you have people who claim they've met these wise, benevolent guides from space. Then you have others who remember terrifying medical exams by strange gray beings. And then you have folks who say they're channeling 35,000-year-old warriors. I mean, these stories couldn't be more different, right? So in this explainer, we're going to try to make sense of it all. We're going to build a kind of framework, a taxonomy, if you will, to map out this fascinating and extraordinary territory. Okay, let's start here, because this quote just perfectly captures the spirit of an entire era. This is from Anne Grevler's account back in the 1950s. It's the classic contactee story. A friendly, almost gentle being just appears, not with a threat, but with a smile. It really sets this hopeful, wondrous tone for what contact could be. But, well, that tone wasn't going to last. Because just a decade or so later, the whole story changes. The narrative shifts from wonder to something much, much darker. Suddenly, the accounts are filled with fear, confusion, and this feeling of violation. The friendly space brother is gone, replaced by something cold, clinical, and frankly, terrifying. And that friendly meeting? Replaced by an involuntary ordeal that people often can't even remember. And then you have this, a completely different category of encounter, one that isn't even physical. There's no spaceship, no being in the room. These are messages that seem to come directly into a person's mind, or even speak through them. So, let's take stock. We've got smiling saviors, terrifying surgeons, and disembodied teachers. How in the world do we begin to organize these claims? Okay, let's start by looking at the two biggest categories of physical encounters, because as the source material shows, they really do represent two totally different eras and two completely different kinds of experiences at their core. I mean, just look at this slide. The contrast is night and day. On one side, you've got the contactees of the 1950s. This was a post-war world looking for hope, and their stories were filled with these wise space brothers offering spiritual guidance. But then, fast forward just a decade, and the narrative gets so much darker. The abductees of the 60s and beyond, their experiences aren't defined by hope. They're defined by fear, by memory loss, and by these cold, invasive medical procedures. And Anne Grevler's story is a perfect example of that earlier contactee era. It's textbook, really. Her car mysteriously stops working, a smiling being she calls A shows up, and she's voluntarily taken on a friendly tour of his ship, even getting to see a giant mothership. It's an adventure, you know, not an assault. But then you get the work of an investigator like Bud Hopkins in the late 70s and 80s. And he wasn't finding stories of friendly tours. Not at all. Instead, he started uncovering these really disturbing patterns. People with huge gaps in their memory, he called it missing time, who only under hypnosis would remember being taken against their will. He documented these recurring abductions and found mysterious scars, even implants that people had no explanation for. So let's move on. Because beyond these physical meetings, there is a whole other world of contact, one that's purely mental, purely spiritual. No spaceship required. And the main method here is something called channeling. This isn't about meeting an alien in a field. It's about becoming a kind of conduit for one. The idea is that an individual, the channeler, can receive and then relay these really complex messages and teachings from a non-physical being or consciousness. So how does this supposedly work? Well, the accounts tend to follow these general steps. First, the channeler goes into a trance-like state. Then, contact is made. A really key feature that's often reported is a total change in the person's voice and personality as the entity begins to speak through them to deliver its message. And probably the most famous example of this is Ramtha. This entity was described as a 35,000-year-old warrior from the lost continent of Lemuria, who supposedly started speaking through a woman named J.Z. Knight back in the 1970s. Ramtha's teachings on reality and consciousness became hugely influential, making him one of the most famous channeled figures ever. You know, what's so fascinating is that no matter how people are having these encounters, whether it's contactee, abductee, or channeling, the messages often go way beyond just personal advice. They frequently build these huge, epic mythologies about humanity's secret past and our ultimate destiny. And you see these same themes popping up again and again. It's like an alternative history of the cosmos. We get these detailed stories of lost continents like Atlantis and Lemuria, tales of humanity being genetically engineered by ancient astronauts, and all these prophecies about cosmic shifts and disasters that are supposed to bring about a new age, at least for a chosen few. So take a myth like this one, based on interpretations of ancient Sumerian texts. What's the point? Well, it completely reframes where we come from. It says that we're not just the product of natural evolution, but that we were an intentional extraterrestrial engineering project. It turns stories we all know, like Noah's Ark, into just one chapter in a much, much bigger galactic drama. Okay, so after mapping all of this, from friendly space brothers to traumatic abductions to these epic cosmic histories, we get to the most important question of all. What is actually going on here? What is the real nature of these experiences? I mean, are people really flying to Venus? Or is something else happening? To dig into this, the source material offers a few different ways to think about it, not to give us a final answer, but just to help us understand the phenomenon on a deeper level. And one of the most fascinating takes comes from the famous psychologist Carl Jung. He looked at one of these contactee stories and said, maybe this isn't a literal trip into outer space, but a profound trip into inner space. He saw it as a symbolic journey of the self, what he called the individuation process, that was so powerful, the person experienced it as being completely real. Now here's another brilliant way to look at it, this time from an anthropological view. Looking at channeling, Michael F. Brown suggests that it doesn't really matter where the messages come from. The point is that the phenomenon itself serves a vital spiritual purpose. In our modern world, it creates a space for people to explore new religious ideas and to reinvent themselves, to find new meaning. So in the end, we're left in this fascinating territory where the line between outer space and inner space gets really, really blurry. And it leaves us with this one profound question. When people report these extraordinary encounters, are they opening a window to other worlds? Or are they holding up a mirror to our own, reflecting back our greatest hopes for salvation, our deepest fears of the unknown, and our timeless human search for our place in the cosmos?